Over 40 million people have been stripped of their safety, their dignity, and their freedom because of human trafficking. Human trafficking does not discriminate on age, gender, race, but preys on the most vulnerable. I'm Melinda Russell. I'm the president of the Rotary Club of Zanesville. I want to thank you guys for being here tonight. I'm really excited and overwhelmed with the turnout. Your attendance really validates that we are a community who cares and a community who really wants to make a difference. I want to thank my fellow Rotarians for helping make this happen. I want to thank the library for hosting us, Janet Long with the Mid-East Ohio Rescue and Restore Coalition, and our partners in this project, Transitions and Seroptimus. Like Rotary, these organizations work together to empower women and to stop domestic violence and human trafficking. So I want to do a little interactive, I want to share a signal that can be used when you are feeling threatened or need help. So this is something for you to recognize, but also for you to use if you are in that situation. So you will want to remember palm, tuck, trap. This is a signal that indicates that you need help. You might see this out a car window. You might see somebody at Walmart, maybe over a Zoom call. If they do this motion, then you will know to say something. So everybody put your hand up. So palm, tuck, trap. So obviously when you do that, when the person does that, they're not going to, they're going to do it very inconspicuously, but know that you're looking for that sign for I need help. So if you guys don't remember anything else, remember that. Okay, I also want to, before I bring up our speakers, the information being shared here tonight is very sensitive material and could be triggering to some people. So if at any point you need to step away, that is totally fine. Your self-care is most important. If you have questions throughout, they were handing out note cards at the door. So feel free as the speakers are up here to write down your questions. We're going to have maybe about 30 minutes at the end to go over those questions. We'll hope to get them all or most of them answered for you. So be sure to write those down. Our schedule of speakers tonight begins with Christy Scott Bartman. She's the founder of Eyes Up Appalachia. Then we'll hear from human trafficking survivors, Molly and Pam. And then finally, our keynote speaker, Esther Flores, founder of One Divine Line to Health. So I will go ahead and let them get started.
Hey everybody, I'm Christy Bartman. I am the founder of Eyes Up Appalachia, which is an anti-human trafficking initiative. We cover all 32 counties of the Appalachian counties in Ohio. And the reason I founded this is because usually we have anti-trafficking coalitions in different areas of the state that work in around anti-human trafficking efforts, mainly because it looks different in different places. And you were very fortunate here. You have Janet Long, who runs your anti-trafficking coalition in Zanesville, in this area, and she's a wonderful resource, so make sure you reach out to her. I work closely with her, and then in the other counties that don't have coalitions, I'm kind of the go-between to help bring state resources into those counties. I don't do direct services, but I do a lot of training and advocacy work. And so I wanted to introduce tonight just the concept for those of you who's familiar with human trafficking. Okay, good. We've got a good group here. So we don't probably need to go through the myths. You know, some of the things that I hear often are, it looks like the movie Taken. You know, no, not really. There's nobody with guns ablazing going after their daughter. It's very much something that happens in the community, unfortunately. A lot of the times, you know, people are thinking, well, it's that white van driving around Walmart. You got to watch out. No, not necessarily. Kidnapping happens. It does happen, but that's not necessarily the way it happens the majority of the time. And in fact, unfortunately, what I'm finding in the Appalachian areas, in the Appalachian counties, is it looks a whole lot more like familial trafficking. It looks like family members allowing access to a child in exchange for drugs or rent or something like that. And so it looks different in different areas. But generally, the definition is compelling someone to commit a commercial sex act, labor or services through the use of fraud, force, or coercion. So I want to break that down just a little bit for you. The fraud, force, or coercion does not have to be in place if the person is 18 or below. We finally, Esther, just these last few years, come up with the rest of the states in the country to where 18 and below, you do not have to prove fraud, force, or coercion there. They're minors. A teenager cannot consent to commercial sex. And when I say commercial sex, I mean in exchange for anything of value. It doesn't necessarily have to be cash or money. It can be drugs. It can be rent. It can be repairing a car. I can't tell you how many things that I've heard there. And also with the sex trafficking and labor trafficking. A lot of the times, human trafficking and sex trafficking, you kind of think of those as one thing. Not necessarily. We do have a great deal of sex trafficking within the state, and a lot of the familial trafficking is sex trafficking. But we do also have labor trafficking in the state, and we're starting to recognize that and see that. And when you think of traffickers, don't think of, kind of your stereotypical. Think of anybody can be a trafficker. Male, female, trans, LGBTQ, anybody can be trafficked. So please, keep that in mind as you go forward. And so some of the things that we're doing here in the Appalachian area, there are certain vulnerabilities, and you'll hear more about this when Esther comes. You guys are just in for it. I am absolutely a huge fan of Esther Flores, so you guys are just going to be loving this. But the vulnerabilities that make someone more at risk for human trafficking, unfortunately, in these Appalachian counties, you see a lot of it. It's poverty, it's substance use, it's truancy, it's missing kids, it's a number of interaction with more than one government agency, CPS, foster care, things like that. Those vulnerabilities, we know what those vulnerabilities are, but we don't necessarily know the prevalence numbers around human trafficking. And so one of the projects that I'm working on with Ohio University is to map those vulnerabilities so we can get a better idea of where we need to focus our efforts and start to look at prevention. Another project I'm working on is with the Ohio Network of Children's Advocacy Centers, and we're going to try to get some baseline prevalence numbers and really understand what's happening in the area, and then bring in the stakeholders to talk about programming so we can address what we're finding. And that's going to be in March, so hopefully we'll bring in Janet and a number of others into these stakeholder meetings. And so that's what's happening right now with Eyes Up Appalachia in the Appalachian area. You're welcome to contact me at any point. Be glad to talk to you. Would love to talk to you.
Hello. My name is Pam. I'm really happy to see so many people here and all of the resources. I grew up in a time where we did not talk about these things, which made it easy for me to become a victim of a child sex trafficking ring. If I would have told my mom, she would have stopped it, but we didn't talk about those. So my job now is to try and be the voice for the women and children and men that are still in active trauma. So I'm just going to briefly share with you my perspective on how we get there. How do we become trafficked? So I'm just going to tell you a little story. A 5-year-old is in bed, woken up by a man on top of her, doing things she doesn't understand. Her body wants to react in a fight or flight mode, but she cannot because he's too big. So her brain goes dark and she detaches. She gets up and goes to school the next day, and this repeats. And I know we've all seen those red flags in our teenagers and other children. We know what those look like. Now she's 20, and she was arrested for soliciting. Her brain is still dark. She's still in fight and flight mode. She's reactive. She's angry. She yells at the officer. She tries to steal out of your car. She's in survival. She's still 6 years old, under some man. But now she's in a cage after he gets off of her because she's been arrested. She's a criminal. Now she's 25, and she has kids. She doesn't know who the dads are, but it doesn't matter. We all love our kids. She tries her best, but she's still sick. She still has, her brain is still dark. She's trying, but she can't regulate her emotions. She dissociates. Drugs are the only thing that makes her feel normal, and so she loses her kids. Now she's 30. And she hasn't been allowed to talk to her kids in a while. She cries herself to sleep, imagining them crying for her. She's full of shame, little self-worth. She sleeps in alleys or doorsteps until someone picks her up and she can make a few dollars. She hasn't slept in days, but it doesn't matter. She's just waiting for the day that God decides to end her pain. So this is a pattern that we know exists. It's a generational pattern of violence until someone intervenes. Imagine what would happen if the youth saw us uplift these women instead of criminalizing them. That's how we end human trafficking. And Esther is going to show you exactly how to do that. Thank you.
Wow, what an honor to be asked to come out here and speak today. My name is Molly. I am a survivor of trafficking. I was in life for 17 years, and I've been out for 5. I am also now a employee of 2 safe homes for women that get out of trafficking and addiction issues. I have a nonprofit where I do outreach on the streets to victims currently trapped in this lifestyle. And I have my CDCA. So what I want to speak on today is the compassionate settings. So I was out there for 17 years. I was pimped by every form of pimp there was out there. I had the guerrilla pimps, which are the ones that'll beat you up and find you in every alleyway you go to and beat you up until you go get them more money. My very first pimp was someone I thought was a boyfriend and convinced me, excuse me for being kind of graphic, but convinced me that he wanted to have a threesome for his own enjoyment, but it wasn't that. He had sold me. So that was my first experience. I've also been trafficked by a trans woman who was very aggressive and violent and trafficked me all through Dayton, Ohio. I was also trafficked by just another woman who used drugs to keep a hold on me and put me in different cities that were far away from people that knew and loved me. So what I want to speak on is 17 years is a long time. What in those 17 years, where did it break down? Where could someone have done something different that may have made the difference for me and will make the difference for women nowadays? And the last 5 years that I've been working, I've worked in various sectors. I've been in the faith-based sector. I've also been in the secular sector, all of that, and I've seen what was missing. It was the compassion. It was the trauma-informed care, the trauma-informed response. It was only pushing an abstinence-based model. It was only pushing that the only way for you to get clean is to get into this institutional setting and do everything we tell you to do, and we'll just deprogram you from using drugs. And there's what everybody thinks is, for some reason, people still think is rehabilitation, incarceration. I don't now, it's all been, I got it all a sponge, but I had 40 misdemeanor charges for soliciting. I had 7 felonies for drug possession, 5, so that was the smallest amount of cocaine that you could have on you. So I had this slew of charges. So there was so many different placements. I had been in the hospital for different infections related to my drug use and related to being beat up by my traffickers, controllers, everything like that. So there was the police that had a chance, there was the judges that had a chance, there was the hospitals that had a chance, there was the people in the community that had a chance to make a difference in my life, and I understand now why it didn't happen. We have stigmatized people that go through this as making a choice. This is not a choice. This is a choice of people with the fewest choices. If you have one choice, maybe 2, what are you going to do? You're going to only pick one of the 2 or die. I had two choices. Either I go out there and sell my body for drugs or money, or I get beat up. Which one are you going to choose? And then once I was trapped in this lifestyle, I couldn't even get a shower without having sex with someone. I had to have sex with a man just to get clean. I had to have sex with a man just to get a barely scraped together meal out of a pantry of a trap house. I had to have sex if I ever wanted to sleep, which I didn't get to do very often because then they wake me up in the middle of me sleeping and bothering me. So, someone that you see out here as just using drugs, I urge you as community members to think about it in a different lens. I urge you to think about these women and the situations they're in. We know by now that this touches all walks of life, so we can't just look at them and say it's all from the other side of tracks. We can't do that anymore. I've seen some of the most phenomenal families have children that fell victim to this to the other side of it. So we can't say that anymore. What I would urge you as community members and people that are interested to be a part of this chain that helps solve some of these issues is to look at these women as how can I help them, not how can I save them, because that'll get us, a lot of us, caught up. We're not out here trying to get rescue stories. That'll happen organically if we do what we're supposed to do as our part in the link. We go out there, and if you believe in God as I do, I go out there, I don't go right up to them and beg them to pray with me. That doesn't even happen. But I show them that Jesus loved me enough that he would have gave me a clean needle in an alleyway because he wouldn't have want my infections that I got through them. And I know that's controversial. Hear me out, though. Hear me out. There is a woman that I worked with when I was working with Esther. She used to call us every night to come pick her up. And one time she called us from a dumpster, and she said she had just been assaulted, and she couldn't get out of the dumpster. She didn't know where she was at or any of that. We went out on site, treated some of her wounds, patched her up the best we could, gave her use kits, safe use kits. Maybe 3 months later, she called us from the hospital, and she had hunted down a caseworker that could find Esther's phone number in the hospital. She had been shot 4 times. She was paralyzed. And not to bring y'all down, like, this is kind of a weird story. It's got a weird double side to it, okay? And I'm going to try not to cry. So it just struck me as so poignant and so much why harm reduction works, that woman was in alleyways asking us for clean use kits. But then when she was laying in the hospital with infected wounds because they weren't taking good care of her, and when she was laying in the hospital paralyzed and terrified for her life, but even more importantly, she called Esther to come and pray the prayer of salvation to her. She had found Jesus through her experience. And the only person she knew of that she saw Jesus through was one divine line to health. So she called for her salvation. And I wish I could tell you the story had a great ending. Unfortunately, it does not. 3 months later, she did pass away from infected wounds from subpar care at the nursing facilities because she only had Medicaid, so unfortunately. But I try to take comfort in knowing I planted the seeds where I was supposed to plant them. So, compassionate settings. The institutions, maybe it works for some people. Let's start moving our thought process to a little bit different of a way, like the harm reduction way. What is harm reduction? Not just Narcan. I don't care if you choose to use drugs or not. I don't get to make that moral decision whether that's right or wrong. The only thing I can do is if I have something to offer you that makes your life safer, happier, and healthier, that's fine. I'm not coming out here to tell you that because you use drugs or because you have commercial sex, I'm any better than you at all. I just want to treat these women. I mean, look, 5 years later, every one of these women that you see out on the streets, because I was every bit as bad. I was 70 pounds, every bit as bad. 5 years later, I'm standing up here. I am actively doing everything I can to repair my community and the women that I serve. So if I can do that, every single one of them out there can. And just if you can view that. Thank you.
I just got emotional because I just kept, she reminded me of Lizard. I called her my Lizard. I had good memories of her. But I think before we start, I just want to get my emotions ready. I would love to just say thank you. I'm all about love. If you haven't noticed, the bandana and my shoes. it is only the power of love that can actually save the most broken people in our society, which are the human trafficking victims. I want to thank the sponsors. I definitely want to thank Janet and her team, Christy, because what we do know is that when a community comes together with love, lives do change. Lives are saved. So you're going to see a little video, which is basically our documentary. It's going to give you more of a little perspective of what our organization does. We are truly frontliners. The name of the organization is One Divine Line to Health. We do have a website if you want to educate yourself. It's 1dl2h.org. Thank you.
How are you? Good. You doing good? You need some condoms too? All right. Hey, you're always welcome to show up at the drop-in center.
I know. Thursdays, right?
Thursdays from 6 to 8:30. Your hands are cold.
I know.
Here, I'll give you the regular condoms too. All right, baby.
Thank you.
I love you. All right, be safe, okay?
I have food. Yeah, I have water.
And Esther, what is your job here at One Divine Line?
Well, I'm the founder of the organization. Also, I wear many hats, or I should say many bandanas, depending on the evening or the day. I could be a nurse, I can be a case manager, I can be a mother, I can be a sister. But most importantly, I'm here to let them know that I am love, actionable love, and that they deserve it.
But what do some of the daily responsibilities look like for you?
It's pretty challenging. Not only as a clinician, I'm always on guard. We are located in a dangerous area, so sometimes I'm also security for them. Trying to filter who can come in and who cannot come in, especially men. We have a lot of perpetrators in this area. We're talking about different tiers of sex offenders. So when we have those type of men here, then they are exposed to a lot of violence, and it is not a coincidence where we're at, where we actually serve a lot of women who have been sexually assaulted and they come here. For example, here this year we've had 40 sexual assault cases here at a drop-in center, and 2 were reported.
Esther, how did you first get involved with One Divine Line to Health?
The goal was basically to carry medical supplies, to have medical supplies donated to the organization, and to take them abroad to developing countries that have limited access to medical supplies and healthcare, and bring physicians from Columbus abroad. But long story short, came back from a trip in Guatemala, did a presentation about children who are being trafficked, and a realtor heard the story and asked me, "Do you know that there's human trafficking here?" And I'm like, "Yes." And he says, "Well, why you're not doing anything here?" And I'm like, "Well, I could, but the reality is American money abroad, you can do a lot more." So he said, "Well, what about if I offer you a house? I'll purchase a house and renovate it." And so the realtor bought a house, renovated the house. 7 months after, he gives me a call and say, "By the way, I have the keys." And I asked him, "What do you mean you have the keys?" He says, "Well, I have the keys to the house." And that's how my efforts in human trafficking here started. He ended up donating a house, which became our first safe house. Now we have 2 safe houses. And now we have a drop-in center where we serve the human trafficking victims, and we also have a garden. All of those properties were donated to us.
What is the main mission and the heart behind One Divine Line to Health?
To be love, the verb. It's just not saying ditto or just showing acts of kindness, but letting them know that they are human beings, that the girls deserve to be loved, and that they are human beings. And that's basically our mantra. And our motto is love heals the sick and love heals the world.
And so, what direct problem does One Divine Line directly solve, or how do you guys solve it?
Big problem that we're having here is the fact that human trafficking is the worst kind of human atrocity. The fact that a human life is disposed and mistreated and has a heartbeat and has emotions and are tortured and mutilated, I have a problem with that. And it's happening in the four corners, and there's not enough efforts during the time that the violence is out of control to protect them. We are the only organization working the evening shift, and that is why we have women, children, young people, transgender individuals coming from all over to our drop-in center, because they know, we're loving them, we'll provide them. We don't have everything, but even if they can come here and have, a pair of pants, or underwears or a bra or a hygiene kit or just a warm meal, that really makes a difference. The Narcan, the syringe exchange program, those are items that our street family needs, and we have that available. That is a good thing.
So how does the community make an impact or affect your goal here at One Divine Line?
This is a miracle. The actual place that we're in, it took a life. Stacy Sheffield died of cancer, and her husband basically went ahead and donated the property to our organization because he knew my heart. And it took the community literally to work together and raise $125,000 to renovate this property. What we have here is because of the community. And I believe that in common unity with love, we save lives.
So is there a misconception you wish people knew wasn't true about victims of sex trafficking?
The biggest misconception that I see is that it's their choice. I have a personal relationship with thousands of women and transgender individuals, and even the teens that I'm currently working with, and that is new to me, especially this year. We're seeing young girls out here. We're talking about 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, is that it was their choice. A lot of times they were just victims of the actual system. An inundated foster care system and foster parents abusing the children. Even the older women, you hear the same stories of what I'm working with the younger people. A lot of time it's by forced. We have women from all over, the United States here, especially on the West Side. So when you have a substance or drug that hijacks the brain, that's how the person is being in control, okay? So what happens is a brain hijacked on drugs, they really can't do much. So people need to understand that there's a substance involved, and it's not that a person is chained, like the movie Taken. We're talking about it's a drug that actually hijacks the brain, and they become a commodity. The body becomes a commodity for a drug lord. So, for example, the drug lord right now is also a pimp. And people need to understand that is a fact. I've seen it, I've dealt with that, and I've had to tell these men, not in my area, not in our property, not, wherever I'm at, that stops. And that's really important for people to understand, that a lot of times the people that I'm serving, they're human beings. We call them street sisters, we call them street brothers. They're not prostitutes, they're destitute people who lack love. And they're somebody's child. So it's not a choice. It's not their choice to be out here.
So Esther, what different type of people do you guys serve in the community right now at One Divine Line?
At One Divine Line to Health, we're serving children, teens, adults, and even older women who are caught in human trafficking. And you will hear stories from, different aspects of human trafficking. from the person who is actively in the life to the survivors.
So, Kira, how did you first encounter or find out about One Divine Line of Health?
She chased me down, literally. The first time I met Esther, she was in that red bug, and she was circling around, and she chased me down. Here, I have some condoms. Like, that was her.
So, what services do they offer here that have made an impact or they've made a difference in your life?
For me, it's just a little more personal. It's not, I don't need the food and the clothes and the basic needs. I needed someone to accept who I was, accept the pain that I was going through, the past that I had, and show me that it can be valued, and I can use that to help other people, share my story and let other people know that they're not alone, because that's what I was starting to feel.
Has the program, has it changed your outlook on life in any particular way? Or?
Yeah, I would say so, for sure. I had a very bad, horrible thought about myself, like I didn't deserve any better. And then, there's women who treat you like you're their own daughters. It just makes you feel like, okay, maybe I am worth something.
What is one misconception you wish people knew that was not true about victims of sex trafficking?
And I think just the whole outlook on it, people probably look at it like you're no good, or that you've been through so much that you can't do anything.
The biggest one is probably that they can treat us however they want to. Like, we're made and we're out there to be abused. That's the craziest misconception I can think of.
What have you learned while spending time with Esther and the staff here at the organization?
That we have a big problem in our city, that officials are not putting the resources into helping the vulnerable population, the people that are living on the streets that are being trafficked, the children. There's no funding going into resources to help our next generation. Like, we're perpetuating the cycle.
Why is it important to offer help to these women?
They're somebody's child. We have so many people right now who are homeless, and that's new to me, to see the amount of families. We're talking about their babies living in cars with their parents. Even though that this is a drop-in center for human trafficking victims, it's kind of interesting because of the love bug, the fact that we cover the four corners. People know us, and if they see the love bug, they know, well, Esther's here, she's probably gonna offer something. And we decided to expand this year, and we're actually offering food on Saturdays, and we partnered with another nonprofit named Jericho. They were displaced because of the changes that are happening in the Bottoms or in Franklinton. So they asked me, hey, can we help? And I'm like, sure. Monday to Fridays, we're working with the women. And if you want to offer some help, maybe on Friday when we're doing street outreach, you can use our facility, and then on Saturdays, and that's basically what they're doing. So we are seeing so many people, aside from the human trafficking. I think that people need to understand what we do here is because we care, and we address the pressing need. And our goal is to get them out of the streets into recovery. But recovery involves a change of environment, a change of activities. There's three things. Change of activities, environment, and people. So if you don't have those 3 key ingredients, it's going to be hard for you to actually, leave the lifestyle, leave the drugs behind. So we're just trying to get into that part in their life where they're actually saying, you know what, it's time for me to go. Because if you say it's time for me to go, I don't care what time of the night it is, I'm ready. I'm going to take you out of it, wherever I can,
So for somebody who's maybe viewing this on a different part of the U.S. or if they're seeing this somewhere else, they're looking to partner and give financially. What does partnering look like for you guys? What impact does that make directly here at One Divine Land Health?
I think it's important for people to understand that we are frontliners, and a lot of times, just like other frontliners, even in those states, we don't get the government funding. It turns out that there may be organizations that are doing or supposedly doing our job, but they're doing it during the day. Common sense says if you're going to work with a population that is in need, then you got to meet them where they're at. That's what harm reduction is. Well, I'm a clinician by trade. I'm a nurse. So the Lady of the Lamp was Florence Nightingale, the founder of the nursing profession. That's what she was known for. She was out there working with the soldiers who were hurt. And I feel that people need to understand, give us an opportunity to show you that our strategies are effective to save lives. It's not only the women that we're focusing on, it's the children too, and a lot of our women are still in the childbearing years, so we want to make sure that we are that connection. And every dollar counts for us. A penny is like a dollar. We stretch it. Most of our funding has come from the community, and it would be nice to have some of those major grants from the government, but they're fathered in. They already know who they're going to allocate those funds to. So if you really want to make a positive impact or a green agape impact, I learned that today, give to our organization through a PayPal or through the website, 1dl2h.org. Thank you. Take a deep breath. I sure need one. Again, Janet, thanks for this opportunity. I want to just educate you briefly on the numbers. And first of all, before you even think about the numbers, you already have a picture. You have a photo. You have testimonials of what survivors look like and what they go through. And even as a person who genuinely cares for them, I've learned throughout my life that they're human beings, no matter what. They're human beings. They're just not numbers. The position that I'm in, I basically went ahead and I gathered the information, and it's legit. I just don't make up numbers. And these numbers have impacted us because we know the severity of the issue. And I'm very grateful that Christy, sorry, gave you the definition of what human trafficking is, but I also want to give you some insight that organ harvesting is considered human trafficking too. What's happened, I do have experiences working in the border. I also have worked with frontliners there, and I've been there as a clinician, working with physicians and working with immigrants. Not many people know that as the millions are coming in, there were millions that were trying to make it here. They were lured into warehouses where they were murdered, and their bodies, let's just put it this way, especially the kids, and we're talking about indigenous people, they have no illnesses. They were trying to make it to the Holy Land, and they ended up dead. And when you go to these clandestine places, what they do is they lure them in and say, hey, we're going to go ahead, we're going to feed you, we're going to clothe you. They'll kill them and take their organs, and then they sell them. People don't want to talk about the organ harvesting. It's happening. It's happening not only in Mexico, but it's also happening on the borders. I'm not making this up. This is the reality of it. So we have to understand that human trafficking is a big, big problem. It's like cancer. Cancer cannot really be controlled. They try to do the chemo, they try to do the radiation to what? To shrink the cancer. It's very difficult to eradicate cancer, because even if they do, you always have to be on the lookout. Am I right? Because it can come back again. So this month is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and I'm glad that I'm here in Zanesville, because I do believe that in smaller communities like yours, you can make more of an impact in comparison to where I'm at. Janet has heard my story, even Christy has heard my stories. I've had good days and I have bad days. I live through what we call secondary post-traumatic stress disorder. However, I do believe in a God, and these two women here also believe in God, because there's no psychotherapist, there's no psychiatrist that can help me, and I'm not going to even relive some of the trauma that I have experienced out there when I'm meeting these beautiful souls. They have heartbeats. They are human beings. And if I was to tell you the stories, which I'm not going to torture you, I'm not that type of person, and these girls are not as well, you would be painfully crying, because I don't know how these women could survive so much abuse. When I think of resilience, don't get me wrong, man, I think of a woman. Because most of the women that I work with have had horrific stories, and a lot of times it started when they were a child. So our program is truly compassion. We don't have a drop-in center without the Love Bug. Or you can't have the Love Bug Street Outreach. By the way, I didn't name it, they did. We're very fluid in our practices, because we make the changes as we continue to grow. First year, we already had broken record. We outgrew the spot, right, Molly? You were there. So now we're in the process of adding an addition so we can have more women to serve. So I have to thank Fatima. She's an epidemiologist. She volunteers, and she helped me with these beautiful graphs. And we're just going to go ahead and we're going to dive in. Okay. So overall, since the beginning of the program, we've seen close to almost over 13,000 women. That's a lot, okay? 13,229. We started by renting some sites for 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. It was a challenge for me to find a site because no one wanted to work with the prostitutes, and because they felt that I was enabling them. I realized the more I spent time with them, I saw that there was a future in them. I'm a firm believer in God, and I do believe in the Bible, and it's been my therapy at times, and I've read many heroic stories. These are the Deborahs, these are the Mary Magdalenes, these are the Marys that society basically rejects. And these women themselves were able to change history. Pam is changing history. She's a board member. She has a voice. We're out there sometimes in meetings, with city officials and letting them know, look, we need to do something different. We have to show what true compassion is. Institutional settings just continue to traumatize the people that we're serving. I love history to a certain extent. And the people that I've admired, even in my culture, I am Puerto Rican. I have a hot temper. They call us hot-blooded people. I'm sometimes reactive with the drug dealers and sometimes the law enforcement because of the injustices that I've seen and how women are treated in our community. But one thing I do know is like, if you look at Harriet Tubman, she was wild, okay? Harriet Tubman was more of an activist than an abolitionist. This is why. She had a rifle. And she had no problem in using it, not only on the people, with the people that actually she tried to, she saved in the Underground Railroad, but she was also part of the American Civil War. That you had a woman, fighting, and guess what? She survived. Sojourner Truth, was also another powerful woman. She was convincing, and she was able to talk to Abraham Lincoln. And I know that there are people that don't feel really comfortable about him, but in his lifetime, slavery was the norm. And Sojourner Truth would take her Bible and talk to him that things had to change. Sometimes, and this is what the point that I'm trying to make, sometimes the men need to understand that women also have brains, that women have also strategies that can positively impact not only a community, a nation, the world. And this is why it's so important for you to understand that slavery, and this is what Harriet Tubman said, slavery is the next thing to hell. Am I right? It's hell. It's hellacious. I mean, going into those dope houses and seeing, and I just want to go ahead and wring the neck of the dope man, because the dope man is now the trafficker. I had a conversation with one of the girls last week. She said, oh, you know what, Miss Esther, this is what I'm noticing. They're saying that the drug dealers are the new pimps. And I'm like, there were 5 women at the dinner table. And I'm like, let's hash this out right now. Let's hash this out right now. And they looked at me. And April is our other peer supporter. She was there. And I said, what are you doing right now? Are you out there selling your body as a commodity for a substance that you have power over? And she looked at me and says, are you selling yourself for that meth, for that crack, whatever you're taking? And she says, yes, I am. If you enter that dope house, which is not that far from us, and I'm taking an inventory of what's going on in that house. If you go into that house and you ask the dope man, hey, can you give me some crack, let's just say, is he gonna give it to you? No. So he says, you're gonna have to stay there because there's gonna be another person coming in, and if you want your drug, you're gonna have to sell yourself. And she says, yes, you're right. I says, thank you. And no matter what, you're more than welcome to come here because I'm not gonna judge you because I don't judge them. But I'm being a little bit more strong because last year we lost 20 women on the West Side where I'm at. So that's why it's very important for you to understand that even though we've seen over 13,000 people in 5 years, okay, there's a greater number of people in this community. And even though they're saying that there's 50 million people that are stuck in this human atrocity in the world, there's more than that. There's close to, 8 billion people in the world? You think that there's only gonna be 50 million people that are being trafficked? No, come on. You don't have to be a mathematician to figure out the numbers, okay? Just like the numbers that are being displayed here in the state of Ohio as June of last year that we had, 461 human trafficking victims when we served, last year, 1,805 human trafficking victims alone in our drop-in center, which makes it, 3 times more than what the state of Ohio is reporting. You see that? Even in our street outreach, the women, we served 3,242. You see an issue? Because where we are at, we're just not only in one area, we cover what we call the red light districts. And I think that that's something that if you're interested in impacting, your community, because Zanesville is not, and she knows for sure, you're not immune to it. They're younger people, and having a love bug or, having a drop-in center in these areas, in these concentrated areas, can truly impact the people that you're serving because it's compassion, it's love. You're stimulating their senses, That's how we do it, They are wired negatively because of a drug. So why not dope them up with the power of love? Because that's what we do. And you know what? It makes a difference. And basically this slide actually shows you from the moment of conception that we started this program, you can actually see the difference. It just kept going up. COVID did not help the situation because actually during that time, the house was given to us, whereas the drop-in center, so it had to be renovated. It took a year for it to be renovated because of all the restrictions and, the warehouses had to revamp their program. For whatever reason, we already know what the reason was, because a lot of the jails had to release the people So then we had men and women, and we saw closely to 4,000 people in 2020. That really terrified me because we primarily work with women. We don't deny food to the men when we're out there on the streets, but I'm a woman, I'm kind of small, and we know that when we're out there at night, most of the the perpetrators are out there, trying to do something. So how we were able to counteract that is like the girls would tell, no, he's a good guy, and I'm like, okay, he's a good guy. And I got to work with some of the men, and these were men that were straight, okay? And they were out there because they were felons, ex-felons, and they couldn't find a job because of their history. So what were they out there? They were also selling their bodies, as a commodity, just to survive. So what we do know is that the commercial sex trade is not a choice, it's just survival. In our drop-in center, we also gathered like the demographics, and with the demographics, the majority of the women that we were serving were white, and then followed by blacks, Hispanics, multiracial and biracial. What I can attest is that what I'm noticing more and more, especially where we're at on the West Side, it kind of represents the United States because it's become very diverse. And we have a little area, we call it Mexicanville. So, and now that area is now, you have now Brazilians that are coming and Colombians that are coming to that area, and it's actually right in the zip code that the drop-in center is located. So when we work with immigrants, and I get a little overwhelmed because if they speak Spanish, they think like I'm everything for them, and I'm like, you don't understand what I'm doing. I'm here to work with the women who are caught in the sex trade, and then all of a sudden, I get involved with these families, and we've had some sad stories of young girls. We're talking about 13 and 14-year-olds who are engaged in this lifestyle. There's a lot of fishing going on out there. These kids, they have phones. Parents, I'm sorry, the kids, the teenagers, you need to be very careful who are you communicating with on these phones, because not everybody has your best interest when it comes to social media. That is why we've had 13 and 14 I can tell you stories, and trying to contact the AG. It says we need to alert the community whenever there's a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 13 or 14-year-old. Amber Alert should go instant. It should be a statewide situation. Why? Because those little ones can end up in our area, and we've had that. I get text a couple of times during the week. Hey, we had this girl, who disappeared from Hilliard, or from here, from there, from Zanesville. Keep an eye on this person. Yeah, we have girls from everywhere. I mean, I'm telling you, we've had girls, which kind of terrifies me a lot of times, because when they come to us, I have to be very careful because we're loyal, right? So we're loyal to them, and we don't want to contact their family and let them know, hey, she's out here being trafficked. I will maybe let them know, hey, I saw her, but I'm not going to give her all the details because I'm loyal to that person. In this culture, you become like a family. I'm not saying that I don't care for the family member. I'll just reassure them, hey, they're on my watch. If they're on my watch, I will do everything that I can, to protect them. This is very important, and I know that Pam had also addressed this. Most of our women are in the childbearing age, so it's not familiar for you to see a pregnant woman, women out there. That hurts me because the majority of the times, and I would tell you 95% of the time, they have no prenatal care. So how have I been trying to work with this situation is, and I do have a kid, so God forbid if I have to deliver a baby, I'll deliver it in the drop-in center in the ADA bathroom. That's the plan right now. is the fact that they are afraid to seek the medical attention because they're labeled, again, as a prostitute, a person that don't care, but there's more to this. And of course, there's complication a lot of times when the woman is doing opiates, because then the baby is born with what is called neonatal abstinence syndrome. Many moons ago, when I started my profession, I was a nurse in the NICU and also in the SICU. So it's interesting, and I think God was prepping me, where I was working with infants who were exposed at that time to morphine, you know? So it was kind of a challenge for me to put a child on a metafusion pump, because we had it's called microdosing, which is kind of interesting because you got people that are injecting fentanyl, and that's microdosing too. And I'm like, how do these people can figure out, you know, what dose to give themselves so that they can get that high, when I had to use the calculator just to make sure that I was not overdosing the little ones, you know? So what we have seen too is that we see women and men who were also a product of that situation. We see people who look like they have fetal alcohol syndrome, you know, or they were an opiate baby. You know, we have children who were introduced to the stimulants when they were when they were in the mother's womb. So now these children, they're addicted to the stimulants. So it's a cycle. So when these two beautiful souls are talking about the generational issues that we see now, we need to end them. And this is why our educators need to understand that we need to have these programs in our schools. We need to talk about human trafficking, even though I forgot when it was, but we do have a law that was passed here in the state of Ohio that the teachers need to be educating about human trafficking. It is the law. And let's look at the schools that you're in. How many of them are teaching about human trafficking? I bet you not that many. However, the teachers need to know about human trafficking, and they get their, you know, education credits, you know, for them to know about the problem. But this issue, it's severe, it's real. So in order for us to really make more of an impact, we have to start very, very young. This is why compassionate settings like ours, we are able to provide the individualized care, but then we look elsewhere, and that's been my experience. We had 12 women last year who made it out of Columbus and are no longer doing the drugs. We've had many girls that went into recovery locally. They were discharged. They were homeless when they entered the program, and they were homeless when they were discharged. And where did they come back? They came back to the West Side. And this is why our compassionate approach is just not giving them a medication, you know, because America has become more comfortable with having a pill for everything, when really we need to look at the overall picture. As a nurse, this is why basically the drop-in center is what we, as a nurse, we call it an assessment plan. You assess, you intervene, you evaluate, and you reevaluate. That's basically what we do. It's basically an action plan, but it's hard for the powers that be, who are men. And I spoke to one of the city attorneys last year, and I gave him the mindset. This is your mindset. Think of it. You guys look like cavemen with a club, pulling the woman by the hair and taking her into a cage instead of a cave. That is not the solution for this. It's the same thing even with the men who are so broken. Incarceration is not rehabilitation. You can spend millions and millions of dollars in building these prisons, but guess what? They're just creating more and more and more trauma. Traumatized people need trusted individuals. And a lot of the trusted individuals, believe it or not, it's people like you. People like you who are in the community, policing your community. You know where these trap houses are. You know where these dope houses are. You know what? Why don't you hang out there and you start giving them some food, you know? hey, I've survived. We've survived. And we've done other stuff that I'm not going to talk to you about because there is law enforcement here. But, but we do everything through one rule, which is the golden rule. You know, love God and love people. With the Love Bug Street outreach, what we do is is basically the drop-in center. We provide the syringes, the Narcan, the food, the clothes. It becomes a little warming station. It's really hard for us, and we've lately had a lot of trauma out there, especially when a woman is raped. Most of our rapes go unreported, unfortunately. So when the Love Bug comes in there, we are there trying to regroup the person, to show the compassion, offer our services, offer to take her to the hospital so she can have a rape kit. Obviously, you probably know what the answer is. What is it? Is it a yes or no? Absolutely. You see, you guys are already trained. And what we have to understand is that at that time, when that person is feeling this way, they have a low self-esteem. They feel like they are the cause. They're not the cause. When you are traumatized, okay, and PM actually did a good job in describing, you know, you're in survival mode. You basically are in a fight and flight zone, but you also freeze. So they feel they're incapable of getting out of that place. It doesn't happen only on the streets. It happens in cars. You know, sometimes they take them into a remote area, and you know they're gang raped. This is the reality of what's going on. So when you look at our numbers, yeah, you know, we saw close to almost 4,000 people, you know, last year because we're covering the 4 areas. And as very similar to the drop-in center, most of the people that we're seeing, they're white, okay, then black, then Hispanic, and then biracial. The age range, this is really, really important for you to understand too, because I also want you to be aware that the trans community is also affected by this, and especially out on the streets, we see more black trans women. So if you don't know, it's a male who identifies as a female. We're seeing more and more of them out in the community. I'm not there to criticize them. I don't get into the whole gender thing because I'm a product of the 80s. I just knew that you were either a male or female or bisexual. Now you have all these different categories. But I make sure everybody understands, especially when they're coming into our drop-in center, we love the hell out of them. I don't care what your name is. If your name is, whatever your name is, I'm going to treat you by that name. That's why our sign-in sheet is really important, because what I do is that's where I gather up all the information, and then at the end of the year, I throw it away, is because I want to make sure that when that person comes in, they have a name. So I'm going to make sure that I identify with that name. You know why? Because it becomes personal. And that's what sometimes the church-going people need to understand. We're not there to preach all the time. You need to take the P out. You need to reach. Because the greatest rule, or the golden rule, is that you need to meet people where they're at, because the Jesus that I know, he would have met them, all right? He would have loved them to the point that they would have said, you know what? There's something different about this man. And actually, I need to talk about this man. He was also a victim, you hear that, of human trafficking too. He was sold, he was betrayed. A lot of the things that my Jesus went through, our girls went through. Our men also went through. In order for you to be trafficked, am I right? You had to experience a betrayal, am I right? That's what it is. So you got to understand that in this situation, that's why it's so complex, because the ones that you trusted, the one that was closest to you, could have been a family member, it could have been a best friend, it could have been a teacher, it could have been a cop, it could have been anybody. Because you know what? When it comes to human trafficking, it doesn't discriminate. So this is a real issue, a real problem, and the only way we can make a difference is by bringing the facts to the table. It's interesting because we didn't see that many trans people, But I would like for you to know that the most of them were between the age of 20 and 30. Okay, a lot of the issues that are happening is that our kids, if they don't have a good support system, they're going to go out there and they're going to venture out, and that's why we need places like this in these hot zones near the schools, even though a lot of times, families don't want to have places like ours near them. But if you have a place like ours, which we don't reject anybody, except men, to a certain extent, we allow the kids to come in. I mean, the first week that we were open again this year, we had children coming in. They were hungry. They knew Miss Esther. First of all, they didn't say Happy New Year. They didn't say hi. They said, hey, you know what? I want food. And I'm like, excuse me? This whole entitlement thing, I don't work well. And it was kind of funny because I talked to them, and one of them was a little gamer. And I'm like, I'm talking to you. If I'm talking to you, I don't need you to be playing a game. If you want food, you're going to have to put that phone down. And he did. And I gave him the food and everything. He says, okay, thank you. And I'm like, the next time you come over here, you just say, hi, Miss Esther. Can I have some food? Instead of, I want food. Because I'm like, I want your phone. If I would have said that my relationship would have been destroyed. But this is something that you also have to understand. Our kids need safer places like ours, and I'm very careful even with the kids because sometimes our kids are a trigger to our women because they've lost the kids to the system. Part of having a compassionate setting is to have a play area. We do. Sometimes our mothers bring their kids and they go upstairs and they play. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as they're in our watch, we know that they're safe, the kids can eat, the kids can play, and mom could be mom. And lastly, by the way, this is my last my last slide, and then we'll start with the QA, is the fact that, and it really breaks my heart to say that we had a large amount of our girls sexually assaulted, and they came to us at the drop-in center. Obviously, at the drop-in center, because where we're located, they're able to come to us. But sadly, we had a lot of women who were also victims of domestic violence. The challenges that we have here, where we're at, is that because they're homeless, the domestic violence shelter doesn't accept our women. And also our transgender individuals. And that's a problem because intimate partner violence does exist. We had 4 of our girls murdered out on the streets, and one of them was a 16-year-old biracial girl. And then we had 20 that basically died on the west side, and that is horrible. But it's just where we're at. So that's why it's so important for us to have compassionate settings and have people like yourselves here to be empowered to do something greater, because there's no greater love than this, than to lay your life for your friend. Thank you.
Anybody with question cards, if you just want to send those maybe to the outside?
So my question is, I was looking at that last chart about the men. Why do you think there was such a large discrepancy in their age? Why more of the older men came in rather than the younger? Because it was sort of the opposite for women.
Sure, this is just from a perspective of someone on the streets, but I think that predominantly the jails are full of the younger guys. A lot of them are incarcerated because they're more willing to go out there and do the more riskier crimes. But it's like the same thing with women, anybody. Like the men out there are when they're younger, are much more able to find women that'll supply their drug habit as long as they go out on the street. So it's kind of a, because I know being on the streets that the guys that were using drugs and at the same time profiting off of my exploitation would sit back in the house, you just never saw them. They're there. They're just back at the house eating food that you bought with your body and getting high with the drugs that you bought with your body. So that's just street perspective. I don't know what the clinical perspective is.
Because when we looked at this, we saw the age range, it's between 31. Most of them were between 31 to 60-year-olds. And what I can tell you that some of them, there were some that were in the jail for a long time, and instead of having case management, I'm a big thing about case management, out of the jails, they were just discharged. So because our jail is located on the west side, guess where they're gonna hang out? On the west side. And for them to get into a trade, it's very challenging. However, there are some people on the west side that are willing to work with them. And what I've noticed is that since the bulk of our people, men that we work with, are between the age of 31 and 40, and if they have an addiction problem, which it is a challenge, but people prefer working with that generation. It's just, I can only talk to you about what I have seen. I probably would have said I'd rather work with the older person because they will probably be more respectful and more willing to complete the work, but it's just the amount of younger, this age group that's getting locked up. I would be curious to also look at, what the jail, what the age range, if they have all these demographics, to see if it kind of correlates with what I'm seeing.
So we have a question wanting to learn more on what family trafficking looks like.
So familial trafficking is very much within a family relationship. So you've got mother, father, brother, sister, uncles, by blood or by a legal definition, a legal guardian. And what it looks like around here is somebody within the family offering access generally to a child in exchange for drugs or rent or something like that. It looks, I've got a survivor advisory panel that works with me that are familial trafficking survivors, and every single story is different. Some of them were trafficked in middle-class homes, the one in particular by her brother, and taken to parties at a very young age and offered out there. Others were trafficked, were labor trafficked. They were brought into this country and then forced to perform, labor, not just exploitation, but serious trafficking into labor. There are others that, the problem with the familial trafficking is it's very hard to see. Not many adults will say, yes, I'm a victim of human trafficking, and almost no juveniles will say that. So it's very hard. But I can tell you that the survivors tell me that if you are a librarian, if you are a teacher, they love you. You're their safe spot. They have so few safe places that they feel good. And they don't necessarily know what's happening to them. They just know it's not the same as my buddies. I mean, it's kind of different. My home life is not that great. But it's kind of normalized. That's what they've grown up with. That's what they've seen. And so they're not going to identify themselves as a victim of human trafficking. And it's going to be hard for them to find the language to tell you that they are a victim. And, I mean, it would take way longer than we have right now for me to kind of go through some of the flags and the vulnerabilities and things, because it's very different from adults. I mean, very, very different what you would see for a child trafficking survivor. And so I'd be glad to come back and talk at length on that, but that's just kind of the real quick version.
Okay, we have a couple more. I'm not sure if this is directed to a certain panel member. What did the person who helped you the most provide? What do you think is the most important thing for a victim advocate to know?
So I'm a little bit over 50 years old. I have my master's degree. I was a teacher in Columbus for 16 years because school was my safe place. And last spring, I still found myself in the middle of Times Square with my 4 children, screaming at them that they were my enemy and they needed to leave me alone. And I almost jumped out of the car that my son was driving. So that was a year after I met Esther. Now, a year's gone by, and I'm not who I was 2 years ago, because the love that she gave me, the acceptance that she gave me, the way that she said, this is not your fault, and we're going to do some things that are personal to you and trauma responsive, and fix the patterns in your brain that you've been carrying around for 50 years. So it was really just making me aware of some of the things that I was doing that I really didn't even know. I didn't know how to get out of there, how to stop that pattern, and going out and helping other people and looking them in the face and saying, I'm like you, like we're in this boat together. Let's see how we can get out of this. Was more effective. The last 2 years with Esther in the love was more effective than 10 years of therapy at OSU's Harding Hospital. It really, for me, it's communication. And because it was such a secret in my whole life, and I was part of a trafficking ring, and I have yet to find one other person in that ring that will talk to me. So, and I've looked, and I've asked, and I've said, will you? And they say no. And I've had family members that say I'm too controversial. And all I'm doing is telling my experience in a loving way. So I think conversations, as uncomfortable as they can be, are important. Because to be honest with you, your uncomfortableness is not as important to me as that child being uncomfortable in the position they're in today. So it's the conversations.
So as far as for the advocacy part of it, what is one like super actionable step you can do? So all of you are in here, you all want to work with these victims and these survivors. Go onto the AG's website, the Ohio Attorney General website, and look up the standards of service best practices for working with trafficking victims. It's a rubric, and it's kind of technical, but if you read through it, you can get the gist of it, and it'll give you some of the how to deal with survivor stories, how to deal with finding them treatment, all the things you need to know. That's been compiled over years and years and years by all the best experts in the country, in the world. So look through that rubric and decide if you're willing to meet or exceed all those rubrics if you want to work with these women or these men or these survivors, because they deserve at least that, for you to go into it educated, knowing that this is what's best practice to deal with these victims.
So I don't know if somebody from maybe law enforcement or if Janet would want to answer this one. So what trafficking is common right here in Muskingum County?
I'm Janet Long. I am with Mideast Rescue and Restore Coalition. In our area, I would say familial. We have a lot of children that are involved in situations. I do a lot of work with CPS and talk to kids. I work a lot with the juvenile court system. They will email me and ask me to talk to teenagers, especially girls, that are sending pics, that are meeting guys online. I just talked to an 11-year-old last week who met an 11-year-old boy in New York online. Come to find out, he was not an 11-year-old boy. He was a 36-year-old man in Columbus, Ohio. So I talked to them. I explained to them what can happen. But a lot of things I would adhere to teachers, to agency people that are coming. You're meeting with these people every single day. Know the signs. Know what to look for. Pick up on clues, things that they say. Personality, parents. I tell you to keep an eye, keep open communication with your kids. Know what they're doing on that phone. Explain to your kids how important it is that those pics, those messages do not go away. Just because it disappears from their phone does not disappear from anybody's sight. I talk about, kids taking pics and, that that boy, if he truly cared about you, or that girl that's asking for those pics, they wouldn't ask for those. And they're not the only ones looking at those pictures. So I would say familial, and I know that a lot of kids think that it's not going to happen to them, that they know what they're doing. This person cares about them, but that's exactly what they're doing. It's the grooming process. It's getting to know their likes, their dislikes, and just all I can say is get involved. And do what you can do to be part of your local coalition, and we would be happy to have you.
Thank you so much for coming, and have a safe night.